Today's webinar explores sustainability and what that can look like in a newcomer gender-based violence perspective work and where the sector can go from here. Maybe some of you on this call have been working in the gender-based violence sector, maybe mental health, the arts sector, and we're always constantly wondering, what's next? What are we building up to? And what are we envisioning? So, building on the HEAL project and also the projects that we've been working on in each of our sectors, um, about the evidence, culturally tailored supports, approaches, we're really going to share things like call to actions, what we think maybe are upcoming in the work that we do on focusing on prevention, mitigation, policy advocacy, and sustaining efforts to end gender-based violence. So I'm pleased to introduce today's panels in brief. I will allow them to share more about themselves as they respond to the questions today. So first up, we welcome back Melissa. Melissa is an art psychotherapist and program worker at the YWCA, Toronto, where she supports the Breakthrough program, Healing Through the Arts. Through this program, she facilitates expressive art-based programming for women and gender-diverse individuals who have experienced violence at any stage of their life. She is passionate about art-based healing and is committed to making mental health supports more accessible, inclusive, and responsive across all communities. So thank you for being with us today. Next up in the green background, we have Georgia. Georgia is an award-winning visual artist and expressive arts therapist and educator based in the GTA, currently serving as Associate Program Director at the Create Institute. Georgia's art and therapeutic work centers on the relational and cultural responsiveness of arts programming, ancestral healing, memory, and embodied trauma-informed care for Black mothers and the broader community. So thank you, Georgia, for being with us again. And I would like to welcome Briana. Briana is the coordinator for the GBV prevention program at the Y Immigrant Services in Halifax and supports the national GBV strategy for agencies serving immigrants. Drawing on extensive frontline and capacity building experience, she facilitates trauma-informed, culturally humble, and participatory learning spaces that fosters collaboration, reflection, and meaningful systems change. Briana is passionate about empowering communities and service providers to strengthen responses to gender-based violence through inclusive relationship-centered practice. And Briana will share much about the resources because we have used many of the resources, including the Bridges to Safety in our training, part of our HEAL program. So something to look into. And again, to structure our discussion today, I will invite our panelists to respond to some guiding questions we have prepared. Each of the panelists will have a couple of minutes to share their perspectives and experiences. And please, for those of you who are attending, we encourage you to submit questions and reflections in the Q&A box. I will be moderating that, and we'll get to some of those questions at the end of our discussion. All right, so here we go. Let's begin with our first question. Our first question is, what are the key barriers to integrating arts or innovative approaches into healthcare, settlement, and the gender-based domestic violence sector? So we're going to start off with Melissa to spark this conversation.
Thank you so much, Christen. I'm happy to be back and looking forward to this discussion today. And so to answer your first question, I believe that one of the biggest barriers to integrating the arts or innovative approaches into healthcare, settlement, and GBDV sectors is often the limited access to long-term funding. The way that the current system is now, and though it is changing, does still tend to favor more mainstream forms of healthcare and mental health services. And that results in arts-based or creative approaches in perhaps being recognized as being less valuable in the landscape. And so Without funding, it is challenging to not only be able to provide effective programming, but also it makes it more challenging to be able to do the research and the appropriate evaluations that are necessary to identify what within the existing programs are working and how we can best serve the communities who need and rely on these services. On a practitioner level, as a practitioner myself, I can only work within the scope of my practice. And so another potential barrier to integrating these innovative approaches could be that practitioners may sometimes have a limited experience in trauma-informed practices that also incorporates the arts. And so it's really important going into practice to just know and be aware that newcomers or people who have experienced GBDV, that to know that they have faced multiple stressors, they continue to face multiple stressors, and to know how to go about in working with that. Um, and so some of the things could be like having their own barriers when accessing supports, accessing employment, housing, language is a barrier, physical accessibility, mobility, and so all of these things. And so not knowing how to access or help or resources, not everybody is going to know how to help in each specific circumstance. So I think it's really important to know that going into it, and to just make sure that um, we work to the best of our knowledge and help where we can.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for touching on that funding piece. I know it's a very hot topic in conversations like this. But you're right, moving to longer term sustainable funding versus episodic funding. And, community members feel that they enjoy and get so much transformation out of these kind of innovative arts approaches, and then they never see it again. And there's a lot of grief, I think, involved in that as well. And I'm going to pass it to Georgia.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello, everyone. I think this is so great because people are on here with multitudes of knowledge, and so I don't have to repeat everything that I hear. But of course, Melissa, you've brought up, yeah, one of the number one things is funding. And I did want to say one general statement about, I mean, this question is great, the barriers, right? And I'm coming from a perspective of someone who has seen how creative practice helps people find voice and restore their dignity and build connection. So the points that I'm looking at as barriers, yes, includes funding most definitely to prioritize it, to make it not only short term for short term outcomes, because oftentimes we see that happening. And even in that regard, why do we want to make them more of a long term impact and less of a barrier? Because, you know, trust, healing, connection, all of that takes time within community. So I would also say, on top of funding, I'm keeping this short, Kristen. On top of funding, you know, a lot of organizations tend to look at the arts, or they see the arts as recreation, right? And it's not a luxury. Creativity and the arts is not a luxury. It's actually foundational. They're ways that we make meaning of what we're going through, you know. So I think that one of the barriers is organizations kind of their viewpoint of seeing the arts in a way that's like a legitimate way of supporting healing and well-being. And I think, Melissa, you also alluded to that in your response. And oftentimes, I'll say this too, we often value what we can measure quickly, right? And so keeping in mind that healing takes time. It doesn't always happen quickly. The final thing I'll say, and I am referring to my notes, is there's many frontline workers who believe in creative approaches, right? But they haven't received the training or support to confidently use them. And in just thinking about this, I like reached back to my brief collaboration with a psychotherapist and another counselor who happened to also be a teacher at Durham College teaching first responders. And so she had been on the front line and all of that. And we together created an expressive arts therapy workshop, a day workshop for QP workers. And they had some outcomes that were quite amazing in that short period of time. So again, the training is a factor. It's a barrier for those who have prominent positions or positions where they're overseeing a lot of people and a lot of volatility and a lot of everything. So that's how I would say some of the barriers come about in this work. And I'll stop there.
Yeah. No,
Thank you.
thank you, Georgia, for touching on many things. And I really appreciate you, shifting that narrative. It's not it is a foundational, essential component. And I think when organizations and practitioners can make that shift, that's when the investment is at play there. And you're so right about that measurable piece. It is so hard to measure things that are a little bit more abstract, but it is there. I mean, there's so much evidence. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Brianna.
I'm so glad that I went last because everyone has said a lot of the things. But I just want to say, I guess a theme that I'll probably be reiterating a lot is collaboration. And so I just wanted to root that, just like some context. I work in the settlement sector, the newcomer serving sector. And I think like a barrier is also like traditionally, we haven't been seen as experts in the gender-based violence field. So we're not often called upon around, programming or like how to apply more culturally sensitive approaches to different gender-based violence programming, whether it's through like healing or prevention or anything like that. But we have a lot of expertise. At the same time, I would say that it's inconsistent. And so training around gender-based violence is like inconsistent across the country. And I think particularly for newcomer serving organizations. And at the same time, like other sectors, like maybe anti-violence sectors, they have a lot of expertise or therapy, but maybe some don't have consistent awareness on how to work with newcomers and different approaches as well. So the good thing is I do think that is changing. And so I am going to kind of like connect it to art, but I do believe that there is a lot more awareness about gender-based violence and newcomers across sectors. But when I think about arts-based approaches, I think the newcomer serving sector has always used arts-based approaches. However, I will echo to the other panelists that it has been seen more as like a recreation, social tool, belonging. And so traditionally has often been used because it is an easy way to connect people across language, across difference. It creates a bit more of an easy access to participation. We know the benefits, and we know that it works and it's really helpful. But as I think like Georgia was saying, not everyone has like training and like how to do that, and like how to like use that, particularly I would say in a violence prevention lens or in a healing lens. And so I think for me, I think the barriers would be as also funding to support those types of programming and initiatives, support to collaborate and bring in external people or experts or art therapists or things, because I think one of the challenges is gender-based violence is already a sensitive topic that requires knowledge and skills and expertise to facilitate conversations, particularly with newcomer populations. And then on top of that, to like incorporate art, I think is people say art-based approaches are trauma informed, and they can be, but they're not inherently trauma informed unless they're intentionally designed. And I think that's something that's really, really important for people who want to incorporate art. And sorry, the last thing I'll say is that we have seen incredible examples of people doing that, and adding arts-based facilitation, and we do know that like that's really important. But I think the last thing I'll just mention is that funding evaluators piece. oftentimes for gender-based violence specific like outcomes and funding, it often falls into information and orientation. And there still is a disconnect that like information and orientation of gender-based violence in settlement work can look different than a PowerPoint. And so it's hard for us when like funders like come to see us or evaluations are done to like how do you measure all of that stuff that why arts-based approaches is being used. And I think that yeah, I'll just leave it there, but that is also a barrier is like how do we make sure that that's embedded in the work that we're doing?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for highlighting that gender-based violence work does look different when you include the arts. And like everyone is saying, it's a very, high impact, low touch type of non-threatening approach that we need to continue to tap into it. And I will say, as many of you mentioned, there is such good work being done. And so the more that we can build that evidence and share with our funders that this actually is a very effective approach, we hope that they can hear our voice through that. Before I move on to the next question, for those of you in the chat, I can see someone's hand raised. So if you do want to ask a question or put a comment, please use the the question and answer feature should be at the bottom of your Zoom menu. Okay, thank you. All right, so our next question is kind of off of what Briana said. There are very good examples out there. So what is the evidence for more creative, innovative approaches to influencing gender-based violence policy that you have experienced or witnessed? So I'm going to actually pass that back to Briana to start us off for this one.
So one of the things is we support leading a national gender-based violence strategy for agencies serving immigrants. And part of that was the idea that cross-sector collaboration is essential. And so from creating resources and tools to support those frontline workers, whether it's to like have materials or training right up to like policy documents that organizations can adopt and change and edit and apply or frameworks, but also collaboration tools. So I think that these types of kind of approaches, it's not innovative to work cross-sectorally, but it is sometimes innovative on a national scale. And one of the things I'll say as an example is one of the components of our national strategy is a champion network. And so we bring together practitioners from across the country. And something that's exciting is we'll have a different theme to talk about. And what we've heard and seen is people are often using arts-based approaches to raise awareness, to share like the lived experiences of newcomers, to engage different cultural groups, different age brackets. And I really have seen I've really seen across the country that arts-based approaches have been used also incredibly in like awareness campaigns where it's like by newcomers, for newcomers, things like that. So I will just say that I think like cross-sector collaboration is not innovative, but it's like it's still important. And I think that like highlighting and creating space for people to share arts-based approaches. And then I'll just mention also on a provincial level, I think we've seen kind of us being able to inform policy changes and things like that as well. So in Nova Scotia, for example, I sit on a minister's table on gender-based violence in Nova Scotia, where I can bring some of like the knowledge and expertise from my clients, from our programming that often come from arts because that's where people share the most. I can bring those lived experiences of challenges and barriers and things to the minister's table. And like, for example, it's not just us, but many collaborative efforts have gone into like policy changes. And for example, the emergency protection order in Nova Scotia shifted from only being 30 days to 1 year. Now, that was collaborative effort of lots of research and lots of other people, but we also informed that too from a newcomer lens of challenges and barriers. And a lot of that experience comes from using arts-based approaches so that people can share and like share their opinions and experiences.
Thank you, Briana. Thank you for highlighting too that people's voices did contribute to that change at a policy level, and that's so important to have that expression for people to, yeah, have their stories be foundational to the change that they, want to see in their communities. Thank you for that example. I'm gonna pass it to Melissa.
You. Okay, so in last year, through a research study done in collaboration with U of T, we looked at sort of the before and after effects of doing an expressive arts programs with mothers or caregivers and their children. And so what was happening before and what was happening after. Through this study, we did find that there was a positive increase in the feelings of things like social connectedness, hope, as well as a positive increase in feeling like the parents and caregivers had new ways to effectively manage stress, improve the parent-child relationship. And in terms of arts and self-expression, the study also found that out of the 52 mothers or caregivers who were surveyed, 94% of those mothers found that they strongly agreed that there were moments when creating art helped them express things that they would have found difficult to express if only using words. Of that same group, 86% of mothers said that they strongly agreed that doing artistic things helped their children process their own thoughts and emotions. And so the study found that these programs and approaches and how they are delivered through the expressive arts model are effective and affirm the lived experiences and the needs of the families who seek support. More families would greatly benefit from these types of programs. So again, it does require that more long-term funding that I previously spoke about, we all previously touched on. And so the funding can also go into making sure that facilitators are more appropriately trained in trauma-informed practices as well. I think it is important for programs to directly influence policies because it's important that the voices of the people who are actually living these experiences, as well as frontline workers who are on the ground and witnessing what is needed and where the system is falling short in real time, these are the voices that matter. And so I think it's important going forward that these are the people who need to be a bigger stakeholder in these types of discussions around policy. There needs to be more research done in terms of understanding what is needed at a participant level and also what frontline workers also need to feel supported in their roles as well.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for honing in on that piece of facilitators. Yeah, we speak so much of the community, and facilitators are often part of the community as well. We are part of that community that need to be equipped with knowledge and the skills. I'm going to pass it now to Georgia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. So profound. Lots of factual information, which is always really good. I feed off it. I don't put it out there as much in the same way, but again, I'll speak to maybe not primarily gender-based violence, but in terms of maybe newcomers and something collectively that we all experience, which, you know, is grief. But in terms of the evidence for more of work in the arts, like the role of the arts is to make what is invisible visible, right? And so I speak to that in terms of how newcomers can come and have left their homeland because of grief, because of losing people in their family. And within that, there are all kinds of ways that either gender-based violence can come in, or just other stories. And that's my point. The idea of using stories, as we've all been talking about, and as I typically have done, I will use an experience of my own. And that is, believe it or not, back in 2022, I was studying a grief therapy course. I was taking a family and marriage certificate program. And the course I decided to take was grief therapy. I said, at some point in my life, I'm going to need this. I haven't lost anyone directly in my family. And it so happened that in the last 2 weeks of taking that course, my father was entered into hospital down in Jamaica. And so I was in real time, you're talking about lived experience, living the experience of being a practitioner, learning about grief therapy, and experiencing it at the same time. And it so happened that it led me to researching rituals from African culture and trying to find my own way of dealing with the disenfranchised vibe of this whole thing, because of course he was in Jamaica, I was in Canada, it was COVID, couldn't get down there. But I say all of this to say that again, it when we understand how the arts can help us, it does lead to expanding creativity. It does lead to understanding how the arts is an imaginative language. When policymakers encounter stories through art, they experience it through art, through exhibitions or community projects. They often engage emotionally as well as intellectually. Right, so these are some of the evidence, some of the changes that I've witnessed in creative spaces, and helping people connect with themselves, reduce isolation, build community, and all of those things are actually really important protective factors in preventing violence. So not everything that counts can be counted, right? We know this, but sometimes the evidence is the confidence that the person has, how they build their relationships after coming out of a violent experience, or even just simply finding the courage to speak, raise their hands, any of those pieces. Not as profound as all the legitimate statistics, but again, this is all important evidence that we tend to sometimes not look at, but it carries just as much weight, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Georgia, for that personal experience. Yeah, does any of the panelists want to respond? Just give us a moment there. Okay.
Do you see what you've just done? You've shown right there how you can hold the space in this kind of a setting. That's evidence right there. So thank you, Christen, because I had to take a little breath.
Yes. No, thank you. And you're so right. Policymakers are humans, and we have to remember that we are emotional. We are designed to be in community and be relational with each other. And I think what I'm hearing too is the more that we are relational with the ways that we advocate for policy, those are kind of the beauties of making that shift. And it's through experience. I know something that we do at Access Alliance is that every time we train our practitioners, we do it through experiential art, because unless they feel it within their heart, their bodies, right, those somatic practice, it is so difficult to refer someone to something that they don't know. And that's such a principle, right, of expressive arts, is that we should not ask someone to engage in something that we do not engage ourselves. So thank you for that experiential kind of highlighting and emphasis. So I'm really excited for this next question because we all love concrete examples. So the next question is, what concrete next steps or calls to action would you like to share to further, these creative approaches to address and prevent family violence? And we touched on some of them. So I'm going to invite Briana to share, and yeah, take your time. We have time actually for the next two questions. So Briana.
Okay, sorry, can I go in a second? I'm so sorry.
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
100%. Okay, I'm going to call on Georgia to start us off for this one.
Okay. Thanks, Briana. I have three listed. I'm going to keep it short as well. Concrete steps or calls to action. I think this is a really practical question, and I will read these off. Number one call to action: invite artists and expressive arts practitioners to the planning table. Not just after the programs are designed. So let's do something that's sort of with. And I find that not only enriches the experience of the final program, but also it enriches what each practitioner comes in with. Because I know that at times it can be very isolating doing the work and not have others who are experiencing, not just experiencing, but training and offering the same sort of work that you do. You still need that to feed you. Hopefully that is making some sense. Call to action number 2, like all of us have stated, funding longer term creative programming, not just one-off workshops. I can't tell you how many one-offs I've done, and the need, even after you do that one workshop, the need from the participants is so huge. The first thing and the most quantified thing that they say is that it should be longer. I wish it was longer. And this is within the GBV community, the newcomers, and or educators or people who teach others. They are all asking for more longer programming. And then number 3, I had support culturally responsive, let's say, slow down and say that again. Support culturally responsive approaches designed with communities rather than for communities. And I shouldn't say rather, but in conjunction with having it be for communities. So we bring people in who can help, support this programming. And I think we can evaluate success a little bit differently also. So my final say on this is let's measure not only attendance, but belonging, confidence, connection, hope, and of course community. I'll say strength, because resilience gets used so much. Community strength, right? And I would say those are my calls at this point. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Georgia. Well said, well said. Thank you for those 3 very, very concrete examples. Yeah, Briana, can I jump back to you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay.
So I guess one of my calls to action, I think I just want to reiterate everything that Georgia said. I also agree with. So just like yes to all of those calls to action. And then I also just encourage people who are working around gender-based violence, especially if have like outcomes related to like sharing information, to think creatively and think of alternative ways outside of a PowerPoint or a presentation. And that there's lots of, as the other panelists have said, the impact does connect more and it creates more social change and I think then systemic change at a larger rate. So an example that I would like to share is that I often find that sometimes arts-based programs are still often gendered and we often like prioritize doing them for women and girls or youth in general. And I just want to highlight that creating opportunities for men and boys to also dive into arts-based approaches is really important. Gender-based violence is already a really sensitive subject. Sometimes there can be a lot of stigma. And part of prevention work, I think, too, is around creating spaces for people to practice, for example, positive masculinity, being vulnerable, being connected to their emotions, and where across different cultures that may look different and have different challenges, there still is, I would say, for many, maybe not all, it is more difficult for men to kind of engage in these topics. So arts-based approaches can be a really great tool. I know we used one specifically, we've done like photography and we like made a physical man box. There's a video. And what we found is the men not only reflected on their own pressures of being an immigrant man and like, Georgia, grief, loss, pressure, expectations, but also like mental health, depression, anxiety, and then how did that impact not just themselves, their partners, their family, and their larger community? And it did talk about how if men don't often have safe and like supportive spaces of expression, it can lead to unhealthy ways of expressing and communicating. And then the other like small example I'll give, just because Georgia was talking about, finding voice and people building their confidence through art. One of our women's groups, we found that specifically some of our women with lived experience were finding it hard to participate in programs in general, just like trauma was showing up. And so we did do sessions around like what stops or prevents or creates conditions where you feel like your voice can't be expressed. And so like women had opportunities to discuss anything from like gender norms to like abuse to like whatever, lots of different things. But then we actually practiced it through like karaoke and singing, and they could bring their own cultural song. And there was something really powerful that was like impossible to measure in an evaluation of some of our clients who couldn't speak that much, take a mic, sing a cultural song, and then all the other women celebrating around them. And it was just like very physically embodying. So art can also be song and dance and like connecting to cultural like roots. And there's something so powerful and healing. And like I would just say like after that, those participants participated much more openly in the other types of conversations because of that experience. And the last thing I'll just say is that like, you know, you can use arts-based approaches and like consensually find ways to elevate the voices of people to share. So like our Men and Boys program, our Forum Theater program was then used as tools to educate others and to raise awareness. And I think that just like seeing and hearing from people in your own community means a lot more than like an awareness campaign done by, you know, some sort of PR campaign or things like that. So I'll just leave it there. So yes, do arts-based approaches and don't be shy and like connect with experts.
Thank you, Briana, and thank you for highlighting men and boys being part of this conversation, because it is so often missed, you know, especially when it comes to funding. How many times is it for women and girls? Yes, and youth, but we need to be looking at the family, right, dynamic and unit, and realizing that, you know, a lot of healing comes from communities, not just individuals going to programs themselves. And I really, yeah, also I resonate with your point that, you know, starting with the arts allows someone to open and kind of bloom into other parts of their life. And so if it finds difficult to make the next step, arts is one of those things that soften, you know, the heart and the soul and so many of that, you know, that process. So, you know, pass it to Melissa. This was a good question. Go ahead, Melissa.
Thank you. Yes, great question. I think a lot of my points have been touched on already, which is great. And I also just want to just take it back to that Georgia mentioned the foundational sort of piece about art and how it's that foundational piece. And I have just been sort of thinking about how the arts along with like things like music and song and movement and dance, totally transcends language. And I think that's just been top of mind. And I just wanted to mention that before I get into this next part. But yeah, I think I had in my notes that I hope to see or have that concrete action of seeing practitioners having a bigger seat at the table. So like Georgia mentioned, having that space to be able to share from their perspective because we're on the ground and we see what's happening. So I think that's really important. I think Briana mentioned as well earlier on how the cross-sector piece is so important. So it'd be great to see more cohesion across different sectors as well. I think that would potentially help limit barriers to accessing supportive services. And again, I'm going to bring it up again. I will bring it up in the future. But I think having access to sustainable long-term funding in order to continue identifying areas of program that work, to be able to have the resources in place to tailor programs to ensure that they are effectively addressing the challenges or the barriers that people face when trying to access services. I think that's really important. And having programs, not only delivering these programs and multiple programs, but having that capacity to accommodate, again, not just individuals, but whole families as well. That is important. That includes men and boys. And I think just more funding leads to being able to provide ongoing support, following programming, better resources for the people who seek out these services, and better services because practitioners are also supported in their roles in terms of preventing too heavy of a workload, leading to burnout and things like that. So, yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you know what? It is totally fine to continue bringing up funding because it is a true reality. I think along those lines too, what does it mean to have joint funding, right? So that we're not just also in our lane, that actually the arts sector can be interested in health and prevention of violence, and vice versa. The health sector can be interested in lifting up, artists and bringing them into capacity building. So I think there's a lot of, yes, education of practitioners, but also education of funders on how to, jointly collaborate with each other so that we are interested in what each other is doing. So that language piece, I know Georgia brought that up, redefining, or not even redefining, but adding in those measures of belonging, collectivism into how we understand what funding can be, right? Yeah, which leads to kind of the last question, which is very similar to the concrete actions, but I do want to ask it anyways, which is what does sustainability look like for the gender-based violence sector or other sectors such as newcomer settlement or healthcare at a participant, organizational, and systems levels? I think often, practitioners who implement programs are very much living in the participant realm. But what does that look like, the trickle up effect all the way to policy, right? We call it like program to policy. And feel free to add in a tidbit there on what you think sustainability is, if that makes sense for you. So I'm going to pass it to Georgia first for this one.
Okay, me first. Okay. Let me get my notes because, um,
Sure.
I'm going
Yes,
to
yes, yes.
reiterate. Yeah, I'm going to reiterate though, sort of the philosophy I said at the beginning, which is creativity isn't a luxury, it's a way people make meaning. It's how we reclaim our voices, it's how we reconnect to ourselves and to others. And that is like a collective community glue then. But sustainability for this particular sector, I do really like the question because it leads to something that I'm doing maybe from more of an educational perspective, but um, like people need tools, right? From a participant level, we need to we need to be able to have tools that we can use ourselves. So developing our own studio practice, whether that's a sketchbook, a journal, doing movement, photography, as Briana mentioned, music, just a creative practice. And of course, we can do this and work with these things intermodally as a participant. These participants that we've all worked with. The arts, and when I say the arts, I want to reiterate this. I don't think the arts is painting, drawing, collage, photography. The arts is all inclusive. So the way I'm moving my hands is an image. The way my voice sounds is an image. They are all within the umbrella or beneath the umbrella of the arts. So I'll move to the organizational level because this is where I sit now, in like still learning a lot, but so this is one thing that you notice, that there's a lot of silos. If we could somehow collaborate instead of working in silos, our artists, along with settlement workers, along with therapists, along with healthcare workers, along with community leaders, along with gallerists and those sorts of people, everybody learning from one another. And I will again give a little personal prompt of one of the too many things that I'm working on. I started a network called Create My Art Story, and it's for anyone here could sit in on those sessions, but it's online well-being network where I offer tools of how to use the expressive arts and build up right now, I think I've had a public nurse and educator, artist, psychotherapist. So from all areas of arts and health, but also in the sector of the arts that is more about aesthetics. So this is kind of speaking to organizational level and teaching and getting them to learn how to use the tools and disseminate it into communities. So that leads me to the systems level, where creativity, what do? We embed it. It's not an optional extra. It's not a nice to have. For example, I'm really pleased because what's coming up, I mean, the Create Institute is one of those places, right? We're at the systems level, we're also education, where we are aware that students come in with a history of violence, perhaps, and personally or within their family or community. And so policy recognition can happen at higher education also. The Create Institute focuses on training, even research. I'm part of a Caribbean group of creative arts therapists who have written some articles with the Canadian Art Therapy Association, and they're coming from Trinidad, Jamaica, different places like that. So this collaboration is really important to embed it in the system at the systems level. The regional municipality of Durham is having a conference probably in the fall around hate in the workplace. And so I'm bringing in expressive arts at that level too. I think a lot of times all these organizations and in the systems themselves, they don't know enough about this burgeoning field. And therefore, it's people like all of us who get a chance to use our voice and show through the arts how we can impact and embed this work directly. I want to finish with just this little thing that I wrote. When creativity becomes part of how we build healthier communities, we're not just responding to violence. We're helping create the conditions where people can thrive, they can flourish, right? So that's me, and I'll end there. Yeah, we got 10 minutes left. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Georgia. That was very poetically said. And that embedded piece, the thing that came to mind was weaving, right? Weaving this into the fabric of so much of what we do. Melissa.
Thank you. And so on a participant level, I think sustainability means being able to continue accessing resources and ongoing support services like housing, legal, employment, food, healthcare, mental health services are all really important. Being able to maintain connections within the community is vital, as it helps to strengthen that sense of self. Moving into an organizational level, I think sustainability means having adequate resources like skilled workers, accessing and maintaining, again, that ongoing funding, long-term funding, in order to be able to provide more long-term programming that responds to the evolving needs of the communities that we're serving. It's needed in order to retain staff and ensure, again, that there are enough staff on hand to prevent burnout and things like vicarious trauma, and to know how to handle that. And so through the breakthrough model where I currently work, we do offer multiple groups, and based on our post-group feedback, group participants have shared that in their experience, gender-based support groups can often be quite short. So they'll typically fall within that 6 to 8 week window, and then that's kind of, you're done, you're in, you're out, which makes it really difficult for them to establish a sense of safety and familiarity. And so through this multiple group offering, and because we're able to offer these multiple programs, they find that they are able to fully engage more with the materials, with the directives. They're able to open up more and share with the group, which can be especially challenging for individuals who may struggle with things like trusting other people. And so that multi-group format has allowed participants, at least in our program, to have that opportunity to become more familiar with the space, with the format of the group, with the facilitators. And they get more out of the program after each session goes on. They go on to describe their personal wellness and confidence as expanding throughout the different groups, and they're able to deepen their healing and move through that initial group where everything's quite new and can be overwhelming. Having that multiple stage type of programming and being able to offer that does seem to help with their own healing journey. On a systems level, I think sustainability comes back to that idea of investing not only in a financial sense, but also strengthening, again, that cross-sector partnership and ensuring that the system of care is cohesive and that it works together so that, again, it remains as barrier-free as possible for people who are trying to access these support services. Again, GBV policies should really be informed by the people who have lived the experience, frontline workers, and the research to ensure that the programs that exist are effective. And if they aren't, then asking the question, what needs to change in order for them to be as effective as possible?
Yes, thank you, Melissa. Thank you. Something that stood out was the phased approach. Thank you for bringing that up, that, programs are very powerful, but it's also what happens, right, to participants after a program, before a program. That whole journey is a whole timeline, and for organizations and practitioners to think about the journey of a participant, through their support. And the other thing I want to say is thank you for saying, yeah, like at a systems level, it's not just financial. What does it look like for large funding bodies to actually create those partnerships, to get us in touch with people that we need to be in touch with? And I think that's also a super powerful, network building that brings along sustainability. Okay, Briana, go for
Try to
it.
be quick. I know we're
No, no,
at
no.
time.
Take all the
So
5 minutes.
it's okay. So just echoing the need for collaboration stands again for me as the most important element. We know that there's no single organization, sector, community, or like even like government or researchers who can like address this topic alone. So sustainable change will only happen when we are working together and bringing together and working collaboratively for a shared goal. And so that also means bringing in skills of thinking of innovative approaches to how to navigate this. Because gender-based violence and domestic violence and things like that, the current reality and the ways that we're doing things, we have to look at alternative ways of working. Many provinces are declaring epidemics. We need to start looking at there. In many cultures, in many communities, arts have been historically used to address like social and like systemic issues. And so I think we just really need to like look more at that and elevate those to look for innovative approaches. And then arts can also support the prevention as a whole community. So not just focusing on people who may cause harm or people who experience harm, but how do we support the community at large? And how can arts create conditions of belonging and safety and things that also reduce violence? The other thing I will also say is long-term investment, just echoing, is crucial because when we do these short-term projects, especially when arts is included, there's not a lot of time to build those relationships. So it's going to take a little bit longer to cover the same topics, but we know that I think someone had said like the experience will have a better impact than just a presentation. But it might take a little bit longer because they might be going on a journey to like, create the conditions of feeling more confident in that, and then it will segue. So we need to create conditions not only for programs to build using arts, because it might take a bit longer, but also the relationships and within community and cross-sectoral, because that also takes time. It takes investment in relationships. And so and also what's already working. So I think like short-term projects, sometimes what ends up happening is you might have just gotten to a really pivotal point and being like, oh, we got it. And then the program is like defunded. And then a new project, like 2 years down the road, will almost try the same thing and it will take them another 2 to 5 years to get there. So creating sustainable funding allows for programs to expand and then new programs to fill in the gaps of what's missing rather than constantly restarting. And the last thing I'll also mention is we need to think of long-term strategic thinking. And without sustainable funding, we can't do that strategic thinking. And also, I just want to echo what Georgia also was saying is that arts needs to be seen not as extras, it needs to be embedded. And we really need funders and evaluators to see it as like a core component and approach. And so that way, when our programs are being evaluated, they don't just look, I think we had mentioned, just at participants and number of sessions or whatever the topics, but about the whole experience and the change that's created. So I'll leave it there.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for ending off with all of that wisdom, and just your perspective too on, yeah, that longevity of funding and having, right? Like that's why we do pilots to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But those pilots are valuable when they continue and then having others fill those gaps. I love that. And to everyone here, right? Art is not, yes, it is ancient. We have been using it for, centuries of humans history. And it reminds me, just from this conversation, that it is returning back to our humanness to be able to use the arts in ways for joy, celebration, but also in times of crisis and in times of need. And I want to, this is something that I learned along, these past years that I thought was amazing was that, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27, has arts integrated in there, which basically says everyone can freely participate in cultural life of their communities and enjoy the arts and their benefits. So all to say is that it is not only right embedded in culture, but it is literally embedded as a human right. And so we need to take that very seriously in many things that we do. So, all to say is gratitude, so much thanks for the stories, the concrete examples that have been shared today. And for everyone on this call or who watches this, please let this be a spark of inspiration for ongoing conversations in your agencies, in your communities, with your friends and family. And this is our last session, so we will not see you next week, but all the recordings will be sent out as well as the relevant, resources. Um, Related to this panel, and I hope that you email us with any further questions or thoughts that you have. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of this rainy, cozy day, and we'll be in touch.